welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am going to be talking with you about the books that I read in the month of July. July was a really good reading month for me in that I actually completed 12 books, which is really high for me. It might be my highest of the year. I'm not sure. Middle grade March is probably up there as well, just because middle grade books are much shorter. But this month was definitely helped along by the fact that it was K-Tropathon, so I was reading a lot of Korean books, which the ones that I've read so far tends to be on the shorter side, like 300 pages or less. So that definitely helped me, along with the fact that I have several manga volumes on here as well and a novella. So let's dive right in so I can share with you my thoughts on the books that I read. I'm going to be going from my least favorite book of the month to my most favorite book of the month, and also updating you as to where these are going on my summer book bingo board. If you're new here and you haven't heard about Summer Book Bingo, I'll link that video so you can check it out. But essentially it's a bingo board that you can plug your summer reads into, and for each bingo that you get, your name is entered into a giveaway that I will do a drawing for at the end of August, well, beginning of September, I guess. So it's not too late for you to join in, because you can get the bingo board and then plug in the books on the bingo board that you've already read so far this summer and see if you come out with a bingo or two. So let's dive right in. My least favorite book that I read this month was without a doubt Lady Susan by Jane Austen, which is a shame because it's the only thing that I was able to read for Jane Austen July this summer. And I don't know, I was not very invested in it. And I think part of the reason is that this is a novella, so it's shorter, so we get less time with the characters. Also, it's in an epistolary format, which is not my favorite when it comes to books in general. I just tend to not get as invested in the plot or the characters when it's in letter forms as I do when it's just a regular narrative, or even diaries. I like diary entries, but for some reason, a lot of times epistolary books just don't do it for me, but there are exceptions. And so I was really hoping that Lady Susan would be an exception for me. But I think the fact that this is such a short volume means I didn't have as much time to get invested in what was happening and really see how cruddy Lady Susan was being. I was so prepared to just hate Lady Susan because I knew that she wasn't great. And so I was really prepared to just love hating her. And instead I found myself unable to really get all that invested in the story itself, unfortunately. This is kind of cheating because I am using this in my short story space, and it's technically a novella and not a short story. But in my opinion, first of all, it's my bingo board, so if I want to put it there, I can. I'm not messing with a giveaway or anything because I'm not winning. But also, like, a novella is longer than a short story, so it just means that I'm an overachiever. Next up is volume 6 of Kuma Bear, which is a manga series that is about a girl who was really into VR video gaming, and she ends up trapped in this video game dressed in a bear suit that gives her all these abilities, but no one takes her seriously because it's a bear suit. And so it's really cute, really fun, but I'm finding that the further on I get in the story, the more forgettable it is for me. Like, I read this at the beginning of the month and I couldn't even tell you like what happened in this volume. Like, I genuinely do not remember. So it's not holding my attention the way that it did in the beginning, but it's still a really fun palate cleanser. I still enjoy it when I pick it up, but I'm finding it to not be something that's sticking with me all that much. Next up is Banned Book Club. This is a graphic memoir of a girl who is going to university in the 80s in South Korea when they're being proclaimed as like a democracy, but it's actually like military dictators who are kind of in control of the country. And there's a lot of books and things that are banned. So this college student finds herself kind of accidentally in this banned book club where they're reading books that have been banned, and they start fighting for democracy and freedom on their college campus. There were elements of this that I really enjoyed. I loved the art style. I loved the story in general and the messaging of the story. But I found that as someone who is not super familiar with Korean history, it really felt like I needed a little bit more context as to what was going on, because when they did talk about what was going on, it was super info dumpy in a way that was like harder to follow than if I had already known about this time period. And if this was translated from Korean, then it would make a little bit more sense, I think, just because they wouldn't have needed the same context that we do as Americans, but this was written in America in English. So I don't know, like I enjoyed it. There was a lot of things that I liked about it. I found it really emotional and really moving at various points. but I did feel like the setting was a little bit clunky, and we switched viewpoints like really quickly, and then it's like, oh, a year has passed or months have passed, and it felt a little bit disjointed for me. But overall, I really did like it. Another thing that kind of confused me about it just a little bit is the fact that this is very much in a manga style. Manga or manhwa. Manhwa is like the Korean version of manga. And since it's illustrated in that style, and I read a little bit of manga, not a ton, but I'm working my way through several different manga series right now. Manga you read from right to left, and so I kept confusing myself while I was reading this book because it looked like a manga, but you had to read it from left to right. Maybe that's a little bit of a nitpicky thing, but that did make it a little bit harder for me to follow as well. So Banned Book Club is going on the library space on my bingo board, and actually I didn't put Kuma Bear anywhere. Next up was another book that I read for K-Tropathon, and that's Familiar Things by Hwang Suk-young. Christy sent me this book, so thank you, Christy. I'd actually started reading it on my Kindle, and then she sent it to me, so I was able to read some of it physically as well. And I love Hwang Suk-young. He is just one of my favorite Korean authors. His prose is just so immersive, and it just sucks me in right away every single time. And I tend to have emotional reactions to his books because they are quite emotional. Although I found that this one, I didn't have the same level of emotional response to it as I did to Princess Body, his other book that I read last year. But I still just really loved it, and I just feel like his prose translates so well to English. And I really liked it. If you want to hear more of my thoughts, this was in my K-Tropathon vlog, and I have much more in-depth thoughts. But I am putting this book on the found family and friendship space because there's definitely a huge found family element in this book. Next up was a reread, and that is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I read this with my in-person book club last month, and it was a really fun ride. I mean, I already knew it was going to happen. So this is probably like my least favorite Brandon Sanderson series that I've read. Although I don't think it's bad or anything, I just don't connect with it in the same way that I do with like Mistborn or Stormlight Archive. But I still think that it's really fun. It's a good YA sci-fi with lots of good Sanderson world building, which is kind of what he's known for, and good character arcs, which is another thing that he's known for. So I did really enjoy this one, but it's really interesting because rereading it, I had a way harder time getting into it than I did the first time. And I don't know if that's because I'm reading Mistborn at the same time, and so I'm enjoying one more than the other. I don't know if that is what's happening here, or just like reiterates that I just don't love sci-fi as much as I love fantasy, although I am getting more into sci-fi as the years progress. But I don't know, like I had a really hard time getting into this one, but once I hit like the halfway point, I started enjoying it more. And I love some of the characters in this book. Like I love Mbot, and I love Quirk, and I love Doomslug. So it's still really fun, and I enjoyed my time with it, but not a favorite, and that's okay. So I am putting Skyward in the reread space because I have read it before. Next up is the other manga that I read this month, and this was also in my K-Tropathon vlog. So if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts on that, again, you can go check out that vlog. But this is a manga about some classmates, and there's a boy who finds out that a girl who's super popular in his class is dying of a pancreatic disease, and he is the only one at school that knows. And so they end up becoming really close because she hasn't told her friends, because she wants to maintain a sense of normalcy, and he's the only one that knows the truth. So they develop a really special bond. You know from the very beginning that she's gonna die, and so it's still very emotional, and I really enjoyed it. I also used this for the booktube recommendation prompt on my bingo board because Christy from Dostoevsky in Space read this last year, I think, when she did like a reading and eating like 80s vlog, which is super fun. You should watch that vlog. It's so fun. But anyway, she read this then, and so that was the first place I had heard of it. Next up is Welcome to Hyunam-dong Bookshop. This was the group read for K-Tropathon this year, and again, talked about this in my K-Tropathon vlog, but as you can tell from my ranking here, this was my favorite out of the books that we read for K-Tropathon this year. It's just so cozy and just really wonderful. We had a great discussion on Christy's channel. I'll link that so that way you can go ahead and check that out if you want to hear even more in-depth thoughts because we had some really great discussions with Yoon, who is one of our co-hosts, and she's currently in university in South Korea. So hearing her take on how the job market and the pressures for academic and professional excellence and success is portrayed in this book was really, really great to hear her input as someone who is living in South Korea. So that was just a really great conversation. But this book is about someone who decides to kind of leave the rat race, so to speak, and open a bookshop. And it's really about healing and community and what does it mean to live a successful life and kind of balancing work with joy and what all that looks like. And so it was just really lovely and I really liked it. I put this book in the place you'd like to visit spot on my bingo board because I would love to visit South Korea. Next up was Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I actually had a vlog of this also where I discussed my thoughts on the book, and then I watched the Studio Ghibli movie, and it was my first Studio Ghibli movie. So I discussed the book versus the movie, the differences between the two, and which one I liked the best. But I really enjoyed this book about a girl who ends up getting cursed by a witch to be in the body of an old woman, and then she ends up working for this wizard who lives in this moving castle, and just kind of their adventures and all those kinds of things. It was just so whimsical and so much fun, and I put this on the joyful space for my bingo board because this book genuinely was just such a wonderful time. The next book is In the Labyrinth of the Drakes by Marie Brennan, and I read this book with my friend Whitney. We're working our way through the memoirs of Lady Trent, and this is book 4 of 5, so we're almost done. And oh my goodness, I loved this so much. This actually, I don't know if this is my favorite book in the series or if it's my second favorite, because it's book 1 was so amazing and I loved book 1. So book 1 and book 4 are my favorites so far. Book 2 I didn't love, and book 3 I liked a lot. So far my 2 5 stars from the series are book 1 and book 4, but I really loved it. The series follows a woman who is a naturalist who is studying dragons in a fantasy world that mirrors the Victorian time period. So it's a time period where women becoming scientists and traveling the world to study different breeds of dragons would absolutely not be encouraged. So it's such a cozy series, and it doesn't feel like a lot of fantasy series that I've read where it's like super magical. It's really not, but it's so lovely, and I've really enjoyed every single one of these. I highly recommend this series on audio too. I think it works really well there. So I ended up putting this book in the book in a series space on my bingo board. The last 3 books here are all kind of like at the same level in terms of my enjoyment, even though I don't think I gave all of them 5 stars. And I did give The Labyrinth of the Drake 5 stars because they weren't perfect, most of these books, but I also can't stop thinking about them, or I just had a really amazing reading experience with them, so they're getting put here. At the bottom of the pile of the top 3 here is 9 Coaches Waiting by Mary Stewart. I read this with my Patreon, and man, this was such a fun ride. So this is a classic Gothic mystery. By classic, I mean it was written in like the 50s or 60s, so it's not like super old, but also it is older. And it's about a governess who ends up working for a family in France and then uncovers some shady things that are happening. And that's all that I'll say about it. But I loved this. It's very description heavy, but that really adds to a really strong sense of place, and you just feel a lot of the unease. I had a few people who actually compared Mary Stewart to Daphne du Maurier. And I think that that's a fair comparison, because I think that there's a lot of similarities between 9 Coaches Waiting and books like Rebecca or Jamaica Inn, maybe more so Jamaica Inn actually. But there's a lot of elements that are really similar, kind of that Gothic feel, the creepiness, the kind of what is happening here, and having a very young, naive female protagonist who ends up in some sort of dysfunctional romantic relationship is a common denominator in just a lot of du Maurier books. Not all of them, obviously, but I think that all of that was present here as well as the really strong sense of place and descriptions and all that kind of stuff as well. So I think it had a lot in common with it, and there were elements to this that I didn't enjoy, but man, this was such a fun ride, and I enjoyed like almost every single second of reading this book. I am putting 9 Coaches Waiting in the new to you author space because this is my first Mary Stewart, and I do not think it will be my last. Next up was a reread, and it was a 5-star book then, and it's a 5-star book now, and that is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 in era 1 of Mistborn, and it was my favorite the first time reading this series, and the second time, still my favorite. It is just very like political and kind of studies leadership after a revolution and those kinds of things, as well as having like some really interesting lore about the world of Mistborn, particularly some of the creatures like the Kandra and Koloss and stuff like that. And it's just, we get more of that in book 3 of diving more into that lore. But Sanderson just does such a good job of like tying everything together and then wowing you with his ending. And so, still enjoyed this just as much the second time around. So Well of Ascension is going in the sci-fi fantasy space on my bingo board. There's a lot of different places I could put it, but that's where it ended up. So the last book that I want to talk about is the book that I just can't stop thinking about. I actually had a really hard time getting into this book initially, but then once I hit a certain point, I devoured it, and it was so good, and that is The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. I actually vlogged this over on my Patreon. Every month I take a book that has been recommended to me by one of my patrons, and I vlog my experience to get all the spoilery thoughts, like all my in-depth thoughts. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you should join my Patreon, and I'd recommend some books to me over there. But anyways, so I read The Secret Agent. This is my 3rd Conrad. I love his writing, just jives really well with me. But I was having a really hard time getting into this book because it is it seems very political in the beginning, as we've got someone who is like a double agent for a foreign embassy, but then is also informing people in England. And we have like a whole chapter where there's a whole bunch of people gathering together who are all kind of like rebellious, anarchist kind of people, and they're sharing their different philosophies and stuff. When I had read a description, it talked about, you know, blowing stuff up as like a form of like protest to kind of kickstart some things and put some things in motion. And so I really thought this was going to be like espionage, and it absolutely isn't. It was not at all what I expected, because what this book ends up being is a really deep psychological profile of a family. And that's what I can't stop thinking about. Conrad just delves so deep into the psyche of like our main character, his wife, and then his wife's brother. And it's just like so gripping in a way that I did not expect. So if you start this book and it seems a little slow in the beginning, I'd highly recommend for you to stick with it, because it's not a very long book, but once you get about halfway through, it just like sinks its talons into you and won't let go. I really loved it. It actually is probably my favorite Conrad, actually definitely my favorite Conrad that I've read so far. When I was reading it at first, I was kind of like, I feel like this might end up being like a 3-star. And then by the time I reached the end, I'm like, is this a 5-star? But the beginning was so difficult, so I don't know. So I'm kind of like still torn on what a rating for this is, but I finished it weeks ago and I still can't stop thinking about it. I am putting A Secret Agent in the classic space on my bingo board. So as you can see, my bingo board is starting to round out a little bit. I actually finally have several bingos, so I am absolutely thrilled about that. I still have quite a few spaces left, but with my plans in August, I already know where everything is going. So I am really happy about that. I think there's actually a chance I might black out my bingo board this year. I haven't for the last 2 years. Both of those years, I think I had one space that I did not complete, and I was able to complete the whole rest of the board. Let me know in the comments what you have been reading lately, what you read in July. Let me know what your favorite book was. I always love hearing what people's top books of the month were. And if you have read any of the books that I discussed in this video, of course, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I always love chatting with you guys about books. books. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.